The room was silent, except for the muffled sobs of a few mourners. The coffin sat at the front, its lid open, just enough to reveal Isabella's pale, lifeless face. Her son Henry stood frozen at the edge of the room, clutching a small toy car in his hand. He was too young to fully understand what was happening, but he knew his mother was gone. He had been told to say goodbye. The boy took hesitant steps toward the coffin, his tiny shoes echoing softly on the wooden floor. Everyone watched him, their hearts breaking for the child who had lost his mother so young. As Henry reached the coffin, he stood on his tiptoes to peer inside. His small hand reached out to touch his mother's cold fingers. But then he froze. His eyes widened, and he stumbled back, dropping the toy car. "That's not Mama!" he shouted, his voice piercing the silence. The room erupted in gasps. Henry's uncle, William, rushed forward and grabbed the boy, trying to calm him. "Henry, it's okay. That's your mother. She's just resting." But Henry shook his head violently, tears streaming down his face. "No, that's not her. Mama has a scar on her hand. She showed me. That lady doesn't have it." The room fell into stunned silence. William's face turned pale as he glanced at the coffin. He stepped closer, his hands trembling as he examined Isabella's hands. There was no scar. His heart raced as he turned to the funeral director, who looked equally shocked. "Stop the funeral," William said, his voice firm but shaking. "Something is very wrong here." The funeral was abruptly halted. The mourners were asked to leave, and the room was sealed off. William, still holding Henry in his arms, called for an emergency meeting with the family lawyer, Mr. Thompson. The boy's words had sparked a storm of questions, and William's mind was racing. If the woman in the coffin wasn't Isabella, then where was his sister? And why had someone gone to such lengths to fake her death? Mr. Thompson arrived within the hour, his face grim as he listened to William's account. Henry, now calmer but still clutching his toy car, sat quietly in the corner, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. The lawyer opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "Isabella's will was read just yesterday," Mr. Thompson began, his voice steady but heavy with concern. "According to the document, her entire estate, including the family business, was left to Andrew." William's jaw tightened at the mention of Andrew. Andrew had been Isabella's business partner and close friend for years, but William had never trusted him. There was something about the man's slick demeanor and calculated smiles that set off alarm bells. Now, with Henry's shocking revelation, those suspicions felt more justified than ever. "But that doesn't make sense," William said, his voice rising. "Isabella would never leave everything to Andrew. She loved Henry more than anything. She would have made sure he was taken care of." Mr. Thompson nodded, his expression grave. "I thought the same thing, but the will was signed and notarized. It seemed legitimate at the time. However, given what's happened today, I think we need to dig deeper." William's eyes narrowed. "What are you suggesting?" The lawyer leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I think someone forged the will. And if the woman in that coffin isn't Isabella, then it's possible she's still alive." The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. Henry, who had been quietly listening, suddenly spoke up. "Mama's not gone?" he asked, his voice trembling with hope. William knelt beside the boy, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We don't know yet, Henry, but we're going to find out. I promise." William wasted no time. He called in a private investigator, a man named Daniel, who had a reputation for uncovering the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. Daniel arrived at the house that evening, his sharp eyes scanning the room as William explained the situation. Henry sat quietly on the couch, his toy car still in his hands, his young mind struggling to process everything. "We need to find out who that woman in the coffin is," William said, his voice tense. "And we need to find Isabella. If she's alive, she could be in danger." Daniel nodded, already jotting down notes. "First, we'll need to exhume the body and run tests to confirm it's not her. Second, we'll need to investigate Andrew. If he forged the will, he's our prime suspect." William's fists clenched at the mention of Andrew's name. "That snake. I always knew he was up to something. Isabella trusted him, but I never did." Daniel's expression was calm but determined. "We'll start with the will. If it's a forgery, there will be evidence. And if Andrew is behind this, we'll make sure he pays." The next morning, Daniel and William met with Mr. Thompson to review the will. The lawyer had already begun his own investigation, and he handed them a file. "I've compared the signature on the will to Isabella's previous documents," he said. "There are inconsistencies. It's subtle, but it's there." William's eyes lit up with a mix of anger and relief. "So it's fake." Mr. Thompson nodded. "It appears so, but we'll need more evidence to prove it in court." Meanwhile, Daniel had been digging into Andrew's background. He discovered that Andrew had been in serious financial trouble before Isabella's supposed death. His business was on the verge of collapse, and he had taken out several loans he couldn't repay. But shortly after Isabella's death, those debts had mysteriously been cleared. "It's too convenient," Daniel said, showing William the financial records. "Andrew had motive. If Isabella was out of the way, he could take control of her assets and save himself." William's heart raced as the pieces began to fall into place. "But where is Isabella? If she's alive, where would he have taken her?" Daniel's expression darkened. "That's what we need to find out, and fast." Daniel's investigation led him to a remote property on the outskirts of town, a place Andrew had purchased under a fake name just weeks before Isabella's disappearance. The property was secluded, surrounded by dense woods, and had no neighbors for miles. It was the perfect place to hide someone, or something. William, Daniel, and a small team of trusted individuals arrived at the property late at night. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, casting the area in an eerie darkness. The house itself was old and crumbling, its windows boarded up and its front door hanging slightly ajar. As they approached, William's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to uncover something terrible. "Stay close," Daniel whispered as they entered the house. The air inside was damp and musty, and the floor creaked under their weight. They moved cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The house was empty, but there were signs of recent activity: a half-empty bottle of water on the table, a blanket tossed carelessly on the couch. Then they found the basement. The door was locked, but Daniel quickly picked it open. As they descended the stairs, the air grew colder, and the smell of damp earth filled their nostrils. At the bottom of the stairs, they found a small, dimly lit room, and there in the corner was Isabella. She was alive, but barely. Her face was pale and gaunt, her wrists bruised from where she had been tied up. She looked up at them with hollow eyes, and for a moment, she didn't seem to recognize her own brother. Then her lips trembled, and she whispered, "William." William rushed to her side, his hands shaking as he untied her. "Isabella, what happened? Who did this to you?" Isabella's voice was weak, but her words were clear. "Andrew. He wanted the business. He wanted everything. When I refused to sign over my shares, he kidnapped me. He made it look like I was dead. He said no one would come looking for me." William's blood boiled as he held his sister, his mind racing with anger and guilt. He should have known. He should have protected her. "We're getting you out of here," he said firmly, "and Andrew is going to pay for this." As they helped Isabella to her feet, Daniel's flashlight caught something on the wall, a series of photographs pinned to a corkboard. The photos were of Isabella, taken over the past few weeks. Andrew had been watching her, planning every move. But there was something else, a map with several locations marked, including the funeral home and the property where they now stood. "This isn't over," Daniel said, his voice grim. "Andrew's been planning this for a long time, and if he finds out we've got Isabella, he's going to come after us." William's jaw tightened. "Let him try." Isabella was rushed to the hospital where she was treated for dehydration and malnutrition. William stayed by her side, refusing to leave even for a moment. Henry was brought to the hospital as well, and the moment he saw his mother, he burst into tears, clinging to her as if he never wanted to let go. Isabella held him tightly, her own tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, my love," she whispered. "Mama's here now. I'm not going anywhere." While Isabella recovered, Daniel and Mr. Thompson worked tirelessly to gather evidence against Andrew. The forged will, the financial records, the photos from the basement, it was all building into a damning case. But they knew Andrew wouldn't go down without a fight. He was a man who had spent years manipulating and deceiving, and he wouldn't hesitate to do whatever it took to protect himself. 2 days after Isabella was rescued, Andrew made his move. He showed up at the hospital, his face a mask of fake concern. "I heard Isabella was found," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "I had to come see her. I've been so worried." William blocked his path, his eyes blazing with anger. "You're not going anywhere near her." Andrew's smile faltered, but he quickly recovered, his tone turning icy. "I don't know what you're talking about, William. I've done nothing wrong. Isabella is my friend, and I've only ever wanted what's best for her." "What's best for her?" William snapped. "You kidnapped her. You faked her death. You tried to steal everything she worked for. You're a monster, Andrew, and you're going to pay for what you've done." Andrew's facade cracked, and his eyes narrowed. "You have no proof," he hissed. "It's your word against mine. And who do you think people will believe? The grieving brother or the successful businessman?" Before William could respond, Daniel stepped forward, holding up a folder. "We have more than enough proof," he said calmly. "Forged documents, financial records, photos, and testimony from Isabella herself." "You're finished, Andrew." Andrew's face turned pale, but he quickly masked his fear with anger. "You think you can take me down?" he spat. "You're nothing but a small-time investigator and a washed-up family. I have connections. I have power. You'll never win." William took a step closer, his voice low and dangerous. "We already have." At that moment, two police officers appeared, their hands resting on their holsters. "Andrew Carter," one of them said, "you're under arrest for kidnapping, fraud, and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent." Andrew's eyes widened in panic as the officers cuffed him and led him away. He struggled, shouting threats and curses, but it was no use. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his empire of lies was crumbling around him. With Andrew in custody, the family finally began to breathe again. Isabella's recovery was slow but steady, and she spent every moment she could with Henry, making up for the time they had lost. William stayed close, his protective instincts stronger than ever. He had almost lost his sister once, and he wasn't going to let anything happen to her again. The legal proceedings against Andrew moved quickly. The evidence against him was irrefutable, and his attempts to bribe or intimidate his way out of trouble only made things worse for him. Isabella testified against him in court, her voice steady as she recounted the horrors she had endured. When the judge handed down the sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole, Andrew's face was a mask of shock and fury. He had always thought he was untouchable, but now he was facing the consequences of his actions. As the months passed, Isabella began to rebuild her life. She took back control of her business, cutting ties with anyone who had been loyal to Andrew. She also made sure Henry was surrounded by love and support, determined to give him the happy childhood he deserved. William stayed by her side, helping her every step of the way. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Isabella sat on the porch with Henry, watching him play with his toy cars. William joined them, handing her a cup of tea. "How are you holding up?" he asked gently. Isabella smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I'm okay. Some days are harder than others, but I'm just grateful to be here. Grateful to have my son. Grateful to have you." William nodded, his expression softening. "You're stronger than you think, Isabella. You've been through hell, but you're still standing, and you're not alone. Not anymore." Isabella reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you, William, for everything." Henry looked up from his toys, his eyes bright with curiosity. "Mama, are we going to be okay?" Isabella's heart swelled with love as she pulled him into her arms. "Yes, my love, we're going to be just fine." Months turned into a year, and life for Isabella, Henry, and William began to settle into a new rhythm. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer felt as raw. Isabella had reclaimed her business, turning it into something even more successful than before. She had also started a foundation to help victims of fraud and kidnapping, using her own experience to inspire and support others. Henry, now a little older, was thriving. He had started school and made friends, his laughter filling the house once more. Isabella watched him with pride, grateful every day that she had been given a second chance to be his mother. William, too, had found a sense of peace. He had moved closer to Isabella and Henry, determined to be there for them no matter what. The bond between the siblings had grown stronger than ever, forged in the fires of adversity. One sunny afternoon, the family gathered in the backyard for a small celebration. It was the anniversary of Isabella's rescue, a day they had decided to mark not with sadness, but with gratitude. They sat around a table filled with food and laughter, the weight of the past finally lifting. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Isabella stood and raised her glass. "I want to thank you all for being here," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "This past year has been difficult, but it's also shown me how much love and strength we have as a family. We've been through hell, but we came out the other side. And for that, I am so, so grateful." William raised his glass as well, his eyes shining with pride. "To family," he said simply. "To family," everyone echoed. Henry, sitting between his mother and uncle, looked up at them with a wide smile. "I love you, Mama. I love you, Uncle William." Isabella's heart swelled as she pulled him into a hug. "We love you too, Henry, more than anything." As the evening wore on, the laughter and conversation continued, the shadows of the past fading into the background. For the first time in a long time, Isabella felt truly at peace. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, but she also knew she could face them, with her family by her side. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Isabella looked up and smiled. The future was bright, and it was theirs to shape.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.